also talked with Aaron for this week's episode of Market Journal. The latest U.S. drought monitor from UNL continues to show no drought classifications for Nebraska. That means the state has maintained perfect conditions for every week in 2016, the longest streak since Nebraska saw perfect conditions for 42 weeks from October 2009 to August 2010. But for those who are looking ahead to the grazing season on their pastures and ranges, Nebraska Extension's Berger says the most important months for moisture are still ahead.
So as we look at what's coming up here in the next few months, obviously as we record this, it's kind of March time frame. So really the critical months we're looking forward to are April, May, and June. That's really when we get the precip that drives what we're looking at in terms of range and pasture conditions. Right now we've had a really warm March for the most part, and moisture's actually been a little bit below normal. So we're really kind of anticipating, hopefully we'll see that shift a little bit to a more wetter pattern as we think about growing grass for the growing season.
As you look ahead to those months and what we might get for precip, how do you use that information to determine what you're going to have for grazing?
Yeah, so as we think about grass growth, obviously moisture that comes during the period when it needs it, that soil moisture profile is really important. So we're being anticipatory and thinking about some trigger dates. If we don't get a certain amount of moisture in the soil profile by, say, May 1st, June 1st, then we're thinking about reducing stocking rate, delaying turnout, some management practices to adjust to that variation in forage production.
We mentioned the precip, but the temperature and specifically the soil temperature that we have across the state, how does that put grasses ahead of growth or ahead of status maybe?
Right, so right now as we record this, it's mid to late March, and we're thinking about soil temperatures that are 8 to 14 degrees above normal right now. That's really triggering these grasses to initiate growth early. How that plays out really waits to be seen as we see whether these temperatures hold or do we go back into a cooler pattern, kind of set them back a little bit. So one thing we do know right now is we look to be earlier than normal in terms of when that grass may be ready to graze.
How different could the grazing plan be for different areas of Nebraska?
Yeah, so it can really vary across the state. If we think about the eastern third of the state, maybe smooth brome dominated, this type of conditions we have right now is really excellent for that. Full soil moisture profile, good warm temperatures. We move into the sandhills. Those are predominantly warm season grasses. Their really critical time is that late May, June time period in terms of moisture. So the outlook there is really waiting to be seen. Western part of the state, we're cool season dominated. We're starting to see a little bit of grass growth start to green up out there, but really April, May moisture there is the big driver for us. So really the time period is still ahead of us in terms of what we're going to be seeing there.
You mentioned the important dates for that early season of grasses. What about for the later in the summer that you'll be using those pastures?
Yeah, so as we think about the sandhills area, warm season dominated, the data would say that really May, June precip is really critical there as well. Once we get past the end of June, early July, even if we get some precip, it has limited benefit in terms of that grass growth. Now there's still benefit, but the real critical window is that April, May, June.
Wondering how those grasses, especially to the west, have recovered from drought. Is it a position where they are back to normal?
Yeah, so what is normal? That's
right.
a great question, but I think we have seen excellent conditions in 14 and 15. We've seen a lot of recovery in many cases of our desired species. And so I would say plant vigor, plant health is really in a good state right now. With the last 2 years, we've got a lot of grass that's had excellent opportunity to recover. And so plant vigor and health is really in a good position at this point.
Last point to make, is there anything with weed control that producers need to be aware of?
Yeah, as we think about this time of year, it's a good time of year to go out and start doing some scouting. If you know some areas that maybe you've had some weeds in the past that need to be addressed, noxious type weeds, having a plan and then making sure you get those at their most vulnerable state is important.
On the Market Journal website, we'll link to more resources on grazing from UNL's beef specialists.